away from it all like this sometimes? Yeah, we go from living in a tent in California to staying in a tent in Florida. Hey, it's all about changing your location every once in a while and being able to see things you might not normally see in your own locale. Like the guy we walked into in the bathroom cooking meth in his underwear? We won't be stopping at that Walmart on the way back, that's for sure. But regardless, getting out on the road is something we should do more often, especially now that we've got our special truck that can give us all the genie-provided comforts of home again. Sometimes I wonder if we shouldn't just become vagabonds, living our lives traveling from town to town and experiencing what the entire world is like. Oh yeah, a guy and his plush cats driving around in a magic SUV. That would make for a great TV show. It's not the craziest idea that's actually been approved. What do you mean by that? He's got that look again. Why does he have to have that look again? If you were a fan of action television in the late 1970s through the 80s, you owe a lot to Glenn A. Larson. We already mentioned years ago how the man was responsible for Battlestar Galactica, but he also helped create Magnum P.I. and Knight Rider, along with making a Hardy Boys Nancy Drew series and another one on Buck Rogers, both of which did last 2 years in the late 70s. The man seemed to have his hand in everything related to action TV in this time period, but that means he also helped create some shows that weren't as successful. In addition to the debacle that was Galactica 1980, there was also a 1987 series called The Highwayman, which was some type of Mad Max Knight Rider hybrid. But we're not talking about that, no. We're here to review one of Glenn Larson's more infamous cult shows that I've heard as either being one of the worst or most underappreciated shows out there. BJ and the Bear.
Hey there, where you going? Not exactly knowing.
Possibly inspired by John Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie, BJ and the Bear premiered in 1978 at the time when movies and shows involving truckers and other forms of cross-country racing/adventure were all the rage. Largely thanks to the likes of Smokey and the Bandit, along with a series called Movin' On that aired for 2 years in the mid-70s. The result? A show about a trucker driving cross-country alongside a chimpanzee. And yet that concept wouldn't even make the top 20 of most ridiculous shows made in the 70s, at least if you include the cartoons of that decade. You get the feeling that while Larson may or may not have been inspired by the aforementioned Steinbeck novel, surely someone at NBC jumped on this because they wanted to make a slightly more whimsical version of Movin' On. Along with the chance they heard about another particular show being developed for CBS. What did all these desires to piggyback other works lead to? It's time to find out as we look at the adventures of B.J. McKay and his best friend Bear. So let's start off with one of the most underappreciated theme songs I've ever heard in my life.
We just keep it moving, ladies, keep it moving. Every day is better than the last.
New dreams and better scenes. Best of all, I don't pay property tax.
Trust me, I am kicking myself that I didn't know about this back when I made my greatest TV theme songs list. This would have at least made an honorable mention.
Rolling down to Dallas, my wheels provide my palace. And off to New Orleans, or who knows where. Places new and ladies too. I'm B.J. McKay, and this is my best friend Bear.
We open with our title characters driving down highway insert number here, and noticing they have a couple of fans.
Looks like they're still back there. Looks like hijackers, kid. Now, it could be a coincidence, huh? Let's find out.
I could just slam on the brakes and then hose down the back bumper at the next stop. Damn, why did I have to be born with a conscience?
You stay right there behind the wheel.
Oh no, this isn't suspicious at all.
All right, you out. Yeah, but the other guy said that I was...
You hear what I said?
What is all of this about? Well, it turns out he was hauling old money being taken out of circulation and thus to be burned. And of course, Uncle Sam wanted a little extra security while clearly not even trusting the guy they hired to haul the stuff. I guess those things can happen when you're willing to haul anything, even when you don't know what it is. But that's the MO for Billy Joe McKay, a Vietnam War vet who now lives as a freelance trucker driving any place where he can get a gig with his pet chimpanzee Bear, who for the record is named after legendary football coach Paul Bear Bryant. His sales pitch is pretty simple. He'll ship anything, anywhere for $1.50 a mile, no questions asked, as long as it's not illegal. Because those aren't two conditions that won't become mutually exclusive at some point. Like the time he proceeds to tell us about, as the 2-hour pilot movie flashes back to when he was in a small southern town called Orly, and this woman begs him to transport something across the state lines. And by something, we mean all of the models for Playboy's Girls of the Backwoods special edition. Actually, it turns out they are running from the sheriff of Orly, Elroy Lobo, who is played by former Moving On star Claude Akins, and is working with other people in the county to run a human trafficking operation. I'd ask if Glenn Larson had bugged Guy Waldron's home to create this story about a corrupt sheriff in a backwoods town, but for crime's sake, Roscoe Coltrane had more scruples than this guy. Long story short here, the whole thing is almost taken right out of Smokey and the Bandit, as BJ tries to get the girls out of Orly County while being chased by the sheriff, but they ultimately get saved by the military after Lobo chases them onto their property. Because Lobo is not only more corrupt than Roscoe, he's also dumber than Chief Wiggum.
Look at this. Sheriff Lobo isn't going to be bothering anybody for a long time.
Yeah, guess who they have to deal with again for the first episode after the series got picked up?
You know, Banjo been hauling White Lightning for you? White Lightning ordered by Sheriff Lobo. Only his deputies keep stopping the load. Only see, the load never gets to the police station. It goes to Sheriff Lobo's Charlotte Cafe, where it was headed for in the first place.
I was wondering what was going on. Now I see it all. You ordered the White Lightning, Sheriff, and then hijacked it yourself.
I know you gotta take jobs wherever you can get them, as even $1.50 a mile wasn't a ton back in '79, but maybe you ought to amend that sales pitch to nothing through Orly County ever again. In fact, there were numerous episodes among the 10 that made up the first season involving Sheriff Lobo. The only thing that really kept him from being a recurring antagonist for the rest of the series? Giving the character his own show starting in the fall of that year. That being said, the rest of the episodes weren't that much different. The second season premiere was all about BJ helping a group of lady truckers that all look like they could make more money as cover girls unite together against the dude bro truckers trying to run them out of business with the help of the corrupt law enforcement in that town. Only in this case, the corruption is just from one deputy, while the sheriff has just been blind to the whole situation. Oh yeah, and the sheriff is played by Richard Deacon, as in Mel Cooley on the Dick Van Dyke Show. Did I mention the episode also guest starred Andre the Giant? Though to be honest, this episode really frustrated me because one key plot element was the corrupt sergeant being made to take on a new female partner called the Fox, and you just figured she would be the key in bringing down this pig. But no, she eventually gets lured into his web of corruption, and they never do get comeuppance as far as I can tell. They even get commended for thwarting the attempted theft of more old money BJ and the girls were shipping, a theft the corrupt cops were masterminding. They did appear in a couple more episodes after that, but that's still not as much as the 6 eps that featured another officer from another town called Sheriff Kane. Actually, you know what, BJ? Maybe you should consider sticking to deliveries north of the Mason-Dixon if every cop in Dixie seems to be on the take from someone. Now, you may have noticed that I haven't talked that much so far about the chimp. That's because, to be honest, often at times it seems Bear is forgotten about. They will occasionally give him a moment in an episode where he gets in on the action, and there were some gags in the beginning where he drinks beer. Good God, be thankful this show aired back before PETA was something. But other than that, his main presence seems to just be for the girls in the show to fawn over him and thus help woo them into hiring BJ. So many jokes about girls loving your monkey and only my good taste to stop them. That's pretty much the show for you. Every episode, BJ takes a job, usually from some hot chick, because he's just that irresistible to the ladies. No kidding. Not only was that how he first incurred the wrath of the other truckers in that second season premiere, but another episode was a clip show showing off all the women he'd met on his travels. And he ends up in some cockamamie mess of trouble that usually involves some crooked cop in some other town that has it in for BJ as well, because apparently the corrupt cops in the South all have a syndicate and Lobo put out a hit on BJ to all of his friends. What makes this crazier is that BJ actually has connections himself within the federal government because he's done jobs for Uncle Sam before. Why in the hell did he never think to have them tip off people in the FBI or something that there's a whole police crime ring in the Deep South?
These government departments, they don't check up on each other much, do they?
Not as much as we have to.
That's the best excuse you have, isn't it? I suddenly have an old clip from an Arrested Development episode going through my head. And if you think I'm kidding about that whole syndicate thing, this season also had a three-parter where pretty much all the corrupt cops have come together for a convention in Las Vegas just as BJ has arrived in town as well. Oh yeah, and the third part was actually the pilot to the aforementioned Sheriff Lobo series. And get this, that wasn't the only additional product this series was used to try and launch. 2 more episodes were made primarily to try and help launch a series for Rebecca Reynolds and Lorraine McCaffrey playing private detectives. The second of those eps even featured guest appearances from Sam Fujiyama and Robert Aston from Quincy M.E. NBC basically wanted a shared universe that included clones of Moving On, The Dukes of Hazzard, and Charlie's Angels. Why didn't they just try to rip off The Love Boat as well? Wait. This was in 1980 when NBC also aired And the merry-go-round goes frickin' round! Yep, this all ties back to a name we've talked about before, Fred Silverman. And just like everything else that happened while he was running NBC, it was completely fracked up. Not only did the series with the detectives never make it off the ground, but Silverman then jammed his monkey wrench into BJ and the Lobo spinoff. He didn't like how both shows were drawing ratings mostly among rural audiences and felt both needed a makeover to attract his beloved urban viewers. Both shows were put on hiatus after the spring of 1980 until January of 81 after they were both reworked to Silverman's liking. I'll probably talk about the Sheriff Lobo series at some point down the line, but as for BJ and the Bear, it was relocated full-time to Los Angeles, where BJ has to start up his own trucking company and hires 7 female stunt bikers as his drivers. You get the feeling this show was trying to compete with Benny Hill for having hot girls just come out of nowhere. And yes, we have another corrupt policeman tied to an evil trucking company, this one called Rutherford T. Grant. And to think Ina Straight actually at one time left Hazard for LA to work for a more honest police force. At any rate, the changes for 81 didn't work, and both this show and its spin-off got the axe following that spring. The show has definitely fallen into obscurity in the years since. As you can tell from the footage I had to find and use, it hasn't even received any commercial video release in recent years. This was one of the dumbest shows I've ever seen. Why can't we have more like it nowadays? The show definitely had flaws, mainly that they kept going back to the well of battling a corrupt law enforcement antagonist, even as the location changed throughout the series' run, as well as the shameless attempts to throw in so much eye candy for the male demographic. It's pretty clear that someone wanted this show to be NBC's version of The Dukes, and I don't know how much of that affected Glenn Larson's actual vision of the show. Still, I can see why it would develop a following, as it really takes the concept of the old road trip comedy movies of the past to make a TV series that blended with America's fascination of the trucking world during its time period. And it at least didn't hurt the career of its star, Greg Evigan, as he went on to eventually star in My Two Dads. Who knows if BJ and the Bear will ever be rescued from obscurity, but it does look like a series that people will keep circulating the tapes on for many years to come. And hey, this was far from even the craziest show that Glenn Larson created. For that, well, next time...